Stepmom convinced my dad I was faking it. He stopped my treatment because of her lies. Hey, so I'm 16, pretty average I guess, except for this chronic illness that's been making my life a constant mess since I was a kid. It's always been me and my dad, Greg. My mom passed away when I was young, so he's been my rock ever since. He's the one taking me to all my doctor's appointments, making sure I have my meds, and just always being there when things get rough. We've been like this little team for as long as I can remember, and honestly, I couldn't ask for a better dad. Life was actually kind of okay, even with all the medical stuff going on. I mean, it wasn't perfect. I'd miss a bunch of school or get stuck in the hospital for a week here and there, but I always knew that my dad had my back. And then, a few months ago, everything changed. Dad met this woman at work, Samantha. She came into our lives like some sort of whirlwind, and at first, I thought it was cool. I mean, my dad's been through a lot, and he deserved to be happy, right? When he first introduced me to her, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, it was just us for so long that the idea of someone new coming in was kind of weird. But Samantha seemed alright at first. She was friendly, like she made an effort. She'd bring over snacks or these little gifts, like she was trying really hard to make a good impression. One time she was all, "Hey, Evan, how about we have a GU night? We could play some video games or watch a movie. Whatever you want." I remember thinking, wow, she's really putting in the effort, and honestly, I liked it. It felt nice to have someone else trying to be involved, and she made my dad smile. Smile in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. And yeah, maybe I was a bit desperate for that normal family vibe, so I went along with it. But as time went on, I started to notice little things that didn't sit right with me. Like, you ever get that gut feeling that something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? It was kind of like that. There were these moments where her friendliness felt a little too forced, like it was all part of some act. One time she was like, "Evan, how about we grab some burgers and fries this weekend? Just the two of us." She said it with this big smile, and I was all for it. But then she added, it's important to build trust and all that, especially when I might be around for a long time. That last part kind of stuck with me. I mean, I hadn't even thought about her sticking around for good yet. It felt a bit off, like she was testing the waters or something, but I just brushed it off. I figured maybe she was nervous or trying too hard. After all, meeting someone's kid isn't exactly easy. A couple of months went by, and Samantha was around more and more. She started spending nights over at our place, cooking dinner, and trying to bond with me. I won't lie, sometimes it was nice. She'd ask me about school, my friends, stuff like that, and I'd think, okay, maybe she's just trying to be a good person. But other times, there was this edge to her, like she was trying too hard to fit in, but it wasn't coming naturally. Then came the day that flipped everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Dad had this look on his face like he was about to say something big. "Evan, can you come into the living room for a second?" he called out. And when I walked in, there he was, down on one knee, holding out a ring. Samantha was standing there with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "What do you think, bud? How do you feel about having Samantha as your stepmom?" I remember feeling like my brain was short-circuiting. I mean, sure, she'd been around a lot, but marriage? That was fast. Too fast. But when I looked at Dad, I could see how hopeful he was, and I just didn't have it in me to mess that up for him. So I forced a smile. "If she makes you happy, Dad, then I'm happy." And that was it. Just like that, they were engaged. Everything moved at warp speed after that. The wedding was set for a month later, small, nothing fancy, just close friends and family. Honestly, I didn't even have time to process what was happening. One minute it was just Dad and me, and the next we were suddenly a family. After the wedding, Samantha moved in for real. At first, it wasn't so bad. I mean, she was still trying to be nice and make an effort. We'd have these family dinners where she'd ask about my day or what I was learning in school. But every now and then, she'd make these comments that just felt weird. Like one time, we were talking about this history project I was working on, and she said, "Well, it's not like you're going to solve world peace, but at least you're learning something." I know it doesn't sound like much, but it just felt dismissive. It's like she'd say all the right things, but her tone didn't match. I started to wonder if maybe she didn't actually care about me or my dad. Maybe she just liked the idea of being part of a family, But things didn't really get to me until one night when I overheard her talking to Dad in the kitchen. I was coming down to grab a glass of water, and I heard her say, "Greg, I just want to make sure Evan likes me. It's important for me to feel accepted here." Dad was quick to reassure her, saying stuff like, "Of course he likes you, Sam. You've been great." But when I peeked around the corner, the look on her face wasn't relief. It was more like calculation, like she was testing him. I backed away quietly, feeling this weird knot in my stomach. I wanted to believe she cared about me and my dad, but something didn't add up. I didn't mention anything to Dad because, honestly, I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if there was something real behind it. As the days went on, the vibe in the house shifted. Samantha was still nice, still friendly, but I started catching her staring at me sometimes like she was studying me. She'd ask these questions like, "Evan, do you ever feel like you want to change in your life? Something different?" It felt like she was fishing for something, but I had no idea what. I started keeping to myself more, spending extra time at school, or hanging out at my friend Jake's place. The less time I spent at home, the better. But it was hard because, well, it was my home. My dad was still acting like everything was perfect, and I didn't want to be the one to burst his bubble. But man, that feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Looking back, I think that's when everything really started to go downhill, even if I didn't fully realize it at the time. But you know how it is? Sometimes you don't see the red flags until they're staring you right in the face. So it's been a few months since the wedding, and things should have felt like they were settling down, right? But the truth is, something wasn't sitting right with me. I tried pushing it to the back of my mind, convincing myself that I was just adjusting to all the changes. But it felt like the more time passed, the more weird stuff started to happen. Samantha, my new stepmom, had fully moved in, and I was doing my best to make it work. I'd go along with the family dinners, answer her questions about school, try to act interested when she asked me about my friends or hobbies. But even when she was trying to be all friendly and supportive, there was this vibe that I just couldn't shake. It was like she was playing a role, you know? Like everything she said was scripted to sound nice, but it didn't feel real. One night, we were sitting at dinner, me, Dad, and Samantha, and she started asking me about college plans. Evan, have you thought about what you want to do after high school? Any colleges on your radar? She asked, smiling like she genuinely cared. I told her, yeah, I've been thinking about it. Maybe IT or computer science. She nodded, but then her smile got kind of tight. That's great, but you know college is expensive. It's a big decision. I felt a little weird when she said that. I mean, yeah, I know college is expensive, but the way she said it was like she was trying to hint at something. Dad jumped in, though, all excited, saying, we'll figure it out, Evan. Don't worry about the money. Samantha smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course we will, she said, but her voice had this edge to it. I couldn't tell if it was just me being paranoid or if there was really something off. A couple of weeks later, I started noticing Samantha was around a lot more, like she was always there no matter what time I got home. I mean, yeah, she lives with us now, but it was like she was constantly hovering, watching everything. One afternoon, I came back from Jake's house, and she was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through some bills. When she saw me, she smiled again, that tight, forced smile, and said, oh, Evan, there you are. I was just talking to your dad about our budget. Things are a little tighter than we thought. I just nodded and went to grab a snack, but I could feel her eyes on me the whole time. I tried not to let it bug me, but it felt like she was trying to size me up. Later that night, I heard her talking to Dad in their room. I wasn't eavesdropping, not at first anyway, but when I walked past their door, I caught part of their conversation. Greg, we need to be practical. Evan's medical bills are piling up, and we're not exactly rolling in cash, Samantha was saying. My dad's voice was quieter, like he was trying to calm her down. He's my son, Sam. I'll find a way to make it work. We'll manage. There was a pause, and then I heard her sigh, all dramatic. I just want to make sure we're not sinking ourselves financially over this. I felt like I got sucker punched. I knew my medical stuff wasn't cheap. I'm not an idiot, but hearing her talk about it like I was some kind of financial burden stung. I mean, she's supposed to be my stepmom, right? Shouldn't she be more worried about me getting better instead of how much it costs? Things got even weirder a few days later. I woke up in the middle of the night with this intense pain in my stomach. It was like everything inside me was on fire. I stumbled out of bed, trying to make it to the bathroom, but I ended up collapsing in the hallway. Dad, help! I shouted, my voice cracking from the pain. Dad came running, and for a second, I felt relieved like he was going to make everything okay. But then Samantha showed up behind him, looking half asleep and kind of irritated. What's going on? She asked, rubbing her eyes like I'd just woken her up for nothing. It hurts, Dad. I think something's really wrong, I managed to say, clutching my side. Dad looked worried, but Samantha just crossed her arms. Greg, maybe we should wait it out? You know how dramatic teenagers can be. She said it so casually, like I was faking or something. I saw Dad's face, and he hesitated for a split second, like he was actually considering what she said. I felt this wave of panic because I needed help, and fast. No, we're going to the hospital, Dad finally said, scooping me up and rushing me to the car. I looked over his shoulder and saw Samantha's face. She wasn't scared or worried. She looked annoyed, like my pain was just some inconvenience to her. It was like she was mad that I was taking up Dad's time or something. At the hospital, while the doctors were checking me out, I could hear Dad and Samantha arguing just outside my room. Greg, these bills are going to be through the roof. Are you sure this isn't just, one of those things where he's overreacting? She whispered. I could hear my dad's frustration. Samantha, our son is in pain. It's not an overreaction. We're doing this. When she said our son, I should have felt relieved, right? Like she was trying to include me or something. But the way she said it was so forced. It didn't sound like she meant it at all. I was lying there, hooked up to all these monitors and IVs, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to go downhill. It was like a storm brewing, and I was stuck right in the middle of it. The doctors ran some tests and adjusted my medication, and eventually, the pain started to fade. But the feeling of unease stuck with me. After they discharged me, we drove back home, and the car ride was dead silent. Dad kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, and I could tell he was worried. But Samantha just stared out the window, her expression completely blank. When we got home, she immediately went to the kitchen like nothing had happened. I'll make tea, she said, but her tone was cold. Dad helped me to my room, and for a moment, I thought maybe he'd talk to me about what happened, ask how I was feeling or something. But instead, he just gave me a quick, get some rest, buddy, and went downstairs. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Samantha looked at me in the hospital like I was some kind of inconvenience. It felt like I was being pushed to the sidelines in my own home. And the worst part was I didn't know how to talk to Dad about it. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Hey, Dad, I think your new wife doesn't actually care about me. That's not exactly a fun conversation to have. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind kept racing. I kept replaying the way Samantha's face looked, so cold, so detached. It didn't make sense. I'd been trying so hard to get along with her, to make this whole family thing work, and it was like she was determined to make me feel like an outsider. The next morning, things were back to normal. Samantha acted like nothing had happened, making breakfast and chatting with Dad like we were the perfect little family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. And for the first time, I started to wonder if this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem. All right, so after that night at the hospital, things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse. Samantha's attitude was different, like she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Every time I was in pain or felt sick, she'd roll her eyes or make some comment under her breath. And Dad, well, he was still trying to keep things together, but it was like Samantha had a hold on him. He didn't push back as much as he used to, and it felt like he was always second-guessing everything I said. One morning, I woke up with that same familiar pain in my stomach. It wasn't as bad as before, but it was enough to keep me in bed. I called out to Dad, but it was Samantha who showed up in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. "What now, Evan?" she asked, and her tone made it clear she was annoyed. "I don't feel good," I said, trying to sit up but feeling that sharp pain shoot through me. "I think I need to stay home today." Samantha sighed like I just asked her to do the most inconvenient thing in the world. "Evan, you can't keep missing school because of a little stomach ache. You've already missed too much." I tried to explain, but she was having none of it. She walked over, yanked the covers off me, and said, "Get dressed. You're going to school?" As I struggled to get out of bed, I saw her watching me with this cold expression, like she didn't care if I was actually in pain. It was like she was just waiting for me to mess up so she could pounce. I stumbled my way to the bathroom, trying to ignore the throbbing ache in my side. When I got back to my room to get dressed, she was gone, and I was left there feeling like I was fighting this battle alone. At school, I pulled Jake aside. I needed to tell someone what was going on, and he's been my best friend for as long as I can remember. If anyone would get it, it'd be him. "Dude, it's getting worse," I said. "Samantha won't believe me when I say I'm in pain, and my dad's not doing anything." Jake's eyes widened. "That's messed up, man. You're seriously not okay." Like I've seen how bad it gets. He looked around, making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in. "We gotta do something. You can't just keep going through this." "But what?" I asked, feeling completely helpless. It's my dad's word against mine, and Samantha's got him wrapped around her finger. Jake paused for a second, then snapped his fingers like he just had an idea. "Evidence, man. We need to record what's going on at home. If we can show someone proof of how she's treating you, then maybe we can get some help." At first, I didn't know what to think. I mean, it sounded extreme, right? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Samantha had this way of putting on a show in front of my dad and acting like she cared. But when it was just me and her, she dropped the act. If I could catch her on camera or record her saying all the stuff she usually says, maybe it would be enough to make my dad realize what was going on. The next day, I decided to try it. I put my phone in my pocket and turned on the voice recorder whenever I was around Samantha. It felt weird, like I was a spy in my own house, but I knew it was the only way I could get the truth out there. And honestly, I was desperate. I needed someone to believe me. The first few times, I didn't catch much. She'd ask me about my day in that fake, nice way she always does, and I'd respond, waiting for her to say something messed up, but she didn't. It was like she knew. But then one afternoon, I got lucky. I was sitting in the living room doing homework when Samantha walked in. She saw me lying on the couch, looking tired, and her face twisted into this annoyed expression. "Evan, are you seriously just lying around again?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's like you're always tired or sick. Do you ever think maybe you're just being lazy?" I felt my anger boil up, but I knew I had to play it cool if I wanted to catch more. "I'm not lazy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just not feeling well." She rolled her eyes. "Right, because you're always not feeling well. Maybe you should try pushing yourself instead of acting like a victim all the time." That was the moment I knew I had something. The recorder was still running, and I hoped to God it caught everything. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, I overheard her on the phone. She was in the kitchen, and I was in the hallway, so I quietly turned on the recorder and listened. "Yeah, I transferred the money today," she was saying. "No, Greg thinks it's all going to Evan's treatments. He has no idea." My heart started racing. What money was she talking about, and why was she lying to my dad about it? I crept closer, careful not to make any noise. "Just make sure everything's set up on your end," she continued. "I don't want any loose ends." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she stealing money from us? And why? I quickly hit stop on the recorder and walked away before she noticed me. That night, I went to Jake's place. I needed to talk to him about what I found. "Dude, I got her," I said, showing him the recordings. "She's not just mistreating me. She's stealing money too." Jake's eyes went wide as he listened. "Holy crap, man. This is serious. We need to get this to someone who can actually do something." We decided to tell Mrs. Lopez, our teacher. She's always looked out for me, and she's the kind of person who doesn't put up with any nonsense. The next day, Jake and I went to her classroom during lunch. "Mrs. Lopez, we need your help," I said, my voice shaking a little. She looked up concerned. "What's going on, Evan?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. How Samantha's been treating me, the stuff I recorded, and the phone call I overheard. Mrs. Lopez listened quietly, her face getting more serious with every word. When I finished, she didn't waste any time. "Evan, this is not okay. We need to take this to someone who can help. Your doctors, the authorities, someone. But I'm scared," I admitted. "What if they don't believe me? Or worse, what if Samantha finds out?" Mrs. Lopez placed a hand on my shoulder. "Evan, you're doing the right thing. This isn't your fault, and you shouldn't have to go through this alone. We'll figure it out together." Hearing her say that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe there was a way out of this. Thanks, Mrs. Lopez, I said, feeling a little more hopeful. I just hope it's enough. She nodded. We'll get more evidence if we need to, but right now we have enough to start asking questions. You're stronger than you think, Evan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That day, as I walked out of her classroom with Jake, I felt a mix of fear and determination. We had a plan now, and even though I was scared of what might happen next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Samantha keep getting away with this. Not anymore. After talking to Mrs. Lopez and showing her the recordings, things moved faster than I expected. I thought maybe it would take weeks or even months to get anyone to listen to us, but she wasted no time. She contacted my doctors and told them about the situation, and the next thing I knew, I was back at the hospital for another checkup. It felt weird, like everything was suddenly speeding up, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. Dad took me to the appointment, and I could tell he was on edge. He kept glancing at me while we were in the waiting room, like he was trying to read my mind or figure out what was going on. He didn't say much, just a lot of, "You feeling okay, buddy? And we'll get through this." I didn't know how much he knew or if he was just pretending everything was fine for my sake, but I could tell something was different. The doctors ran a bunch of tests, and I could see them exchanging looks and whispering to each other. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew it wasn't good. When one of them came over and started asking me questions, like if I was getting my medication regularly or if anyone was monitoring my symptoms at home, I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach. I glanced over at Dad, and he looked confused, like he didn't understand why they were asking these questions. That's when one of the doctors pulled Dad aside. I watched as they talked, and I could see the expression on Dad's face go from confusion to something that looked like anger, or maybe even fear. He kept shaking his head, and I could tell he was arguing back, but the doctor stayed calm, just nodding and speaking quietly. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clear they were serious. After a while, Dad came back to my side. He tried to put on a smile, but it was shaky. "Hey, buddy, they're just being cautious, okay? They want to make sure everything's all right." I nodded, but I could tell there was more to it than that. The doctors wouldn't have called us in like this if they didn't have serious concerns. As we were getting ready to leave, the doctor who talked to my dad pulled me aside. "Evan, if there's anything you need to tell us about how things are going at home, you can talk to me. It's important we know everything to make sure you get the right care." I felt my heart racing, and I wanted to tell him everything right then, but I was scared. What if Samantha found out? What if Dad didn't believe me? I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. "Yeah, it's okay. I'm getting my meds and stuff," I said, trying to sound convincing. The doctor didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it. "All right, just remember, you can always reach out if you need anything." On the way home, the tension in the car was thick. Dad kept glancing over at me, like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. I was staring out the window, wondering what would happen if Samantha found out we were talking to doctors behind her back. She was already suspicious of me, and I didn't want to make things worse. When we got home, Samantha was waiting for us. She was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, with this look that made my skin crawl. "How was the checkup?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes cold. Dad forced a smile. "It was fine. Just routine stuff." He was trying to act normal, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Samantha turned to me, and I could tell she was testing me. "Evan, did they find anything new? You know, you've been going to the hospital a lot lately," she said, like she was accusing me of faking it or something. I just shrugged. "No. They said everything was the same." "Good," she replied, still watching me closely. "We wouldn't want any unnecessary drama, right?" The next few days felt like walking on eggshells. Samantha was around more than ever, and it felt like she was keeping an eye on me, waiting for me to mess up or say something that would give away what was really going on. I had to be careful, keeping my phone hidden and only recording when I was sure she wouldn't catch me. Then one afternoon, I overheard a phone call that made my heart drop. I was supposed to be napping in my room, but I heard Samantha's voice from downstairs. So, I quietly opened my door and crept to the top of the stairs. She was on the phone, her voice low and serious. "Yes, I know. No, he's fine, just stubborn as always. Greg's clueless, but that's how I want it." I felt my stomach twist. She was talking about me and Dad, and it wasn't in a good way. I fumbled to pull out my phone, hitting the record button as fast as I could. "Just keep things quiet for now," she continued. "I've moved more money today, another $4,000. He thinks it's all for Evan's treatments, but if all goes well, he won't find out until it's too late." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. She was stealing money, and she was planning something, but I didn't know what. I wanted to barge down there and confront her, but I knew I had to stay hidden if I wanted this recording. This was the proof I needed, something that would show my dad the truth. When the call ended, I quickly moved back to my room, making sure I didn't make any noise. I felt like a spy or something sneaking around my own house. I replayed the recording a few times, and it was all there, her voice, clear as day, talking about the money and how she was tricking Dad. This was it. This was the evidence we needed. The next day, I showed the recording to Jake and Mrs. Lopez at school. They listened, and I could see the anger on their faces as they heard Samantha's voice. "This is exactly what we needed," Mrs. Lopez said, her voice steady but firm. "We're going to take this to the authorities, Evan. You've been through enough." "Yeah, man, this is messed up," Jake added. "We got to make sure she doesn't get away with it." But I was scared. I mean, yeah, we had the evidence now, but what if it wasn't enough? What if Samantha found out and managed to talk her way out of it? I'd seen how she could put on a show and make herself look like the perfect stepmom whenever Dad was around. What if she did the same thing to the authorities? Mrs. Lopez must have seen the worry on my face because she said, "Evan, you've done everything right. We'll make sure this gets handled. You're not alone in this." Hearing her say that made me feel a little better, but there was still a part of me that was terrified. When I got home that night, Samantha was there, pretending everything was fine, acting like the perfect housewife. But I knew better now. I had the proof, and even though I didn't know how things would play out, I was ready for whatever came next. It was time to expose the truth. All right, so after everything, gathering the recordings, talking to Mrs. Lopez, and getting my best friend Jake involved, I knew things were getting serious. We had the evidence we needed, but I was still nervous about what was going to happen next. I've been walking around the house on edge, feeling like Samantha could figure out what we were up to at any moment. A couple of days after I showed the recording to Mrs. Lopez, I got called into her office during lunch. My heart was pounding as I walked down the hall. I kept telling myself that everything was going to be fine, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. When I got there, she was sitting behind her desk with a serious look on her face. And Jake was already there too, looking tense. "Evan, we've contacted the authorities," Mrs. Lopez said, her voice calm but firm. "They're taking this seriously, and they'll be reaching out to your dad soon." I felt this wave of relief wash over me, but it was mixed with fear. "What happens now?" I asked. "What if she tries to lie her way out of it?" Jake jumped in. "Dude, we've got the recordings. There's no way she can talk her way out of this." "We got her?" Mrs. Lopez nodded. "You've done everything right, Evan. Now it's about making sure you stay safe." Hearing that was reassuring, but I knew this was only the beginning. As soon as I got home that day, I noticed something was different. Dad's car was in the driveway, which was weird since he usually worked late. My stomach dropped. Something was definitely going on. I walked into the house, and the tension hit me like a wall. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, and Samantha was pacing back and forth, her face red and angry. "What do you mean they're investigating us?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "This is ridiculous, Greg." Dad looked up when he saw me, and I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Evan, can you come in here for a minute?" he asked, his voice tired. Samantha turned to glare at me, and for a moment, I felt like a bug under a microscope. I sat down, trying to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. "What's going on?" I asked, pretending like I didn't know. Dad took a deep breath. "We got a call from Child Protective Services. They said someone reported neglect, and they have recordings." He looked at me, and I could see the questions swirling in his eyes. Samantha's face was furious. "This is all some misunderstanding. Evan, tell them you're fine. Tell them we take care of you," she snapped. Her voice was so sharp, it felt like every word was meant to cut right through me. I swallowed hard. "Dad, I recorded what was happening because I needed proof. I knew something wasn't right." I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking as I played the recording where she talked about taking money meant for my treatments. Samantha's voice filled the room, and Dad's face went pale. She tried to grab my phone, but I pulled it back. "Evan, you little?" she started, but Dad cut her off. "Samantha, enough," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. I'd never seen him like that before. He looked so angry, but there was sadness too, like everything was crashing down around him. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Have you been taking money and lying to me?" For a second, Samantha's face softened, and she tried to play the victim. "Greg, it's not what you think. I was just trying to manage things. You know how expensive Evan's treatments are. I was doing it for us, but I wasn't buying it, and this time, neither was Dad." He looked at me, and I could see something changing in his eyes, like he was finally seeing the truth. "Evan, go to your room," he said, his voice quiet. "I need to talk to Samantha alone." I didn't need to be told twice. I rushed to my room, but I left the door open just a crack so I could hear what was going on. I know I probably shouldn't have eavesdropped, but I needed to know how this was going to play out. As soon as I was out of sight, Samantha's tone changed completely. She was trying to spin the story, saying how she was just stressed and felt like she had no choice. But Dad wasn't having it. "You've been lying to me, Sam. You've been taking money meant for Evan's treatments and using it for God knows what. How could you do this?" Her response was cold. "I did what I had to. You were so focused on Evan that you weren't thinking straight. I was trying to protect us." I could feel my hands clenching into fists. She was still pretending like this was all for us, like she hadn't been making my life a living nightmare. It was silent for a while, and then I heard Dad's voice again, softer this time. "I can't believe I trusted you." There was something final in his tone, like he was done. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house by tonight." I didn't hear what she said next because it was mostly shouting and the sound of her stomping around the kitchen. I sat there on my bed, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Relief that my dad was finally standing up for me, but fear because I didn't know what Samantha would do next. I could hear her slamming things around, and it sounded like she was packing up to leave. A few hours later, Dad knocked on my door. "Evan, can we talk?" he asked, his voice sounding heavy. I nodded and let him in. He sat down next to me, and for a moment, he just stared at the floor like he was trying to figure out what to say. "I'm sorry, buddy," he finally said. "I should have believed you. I should have seen what was happening. But I didn't, and that's on me." He looked up at me, and I could see the guilt all over his face. "I failed you." I felt a lump in my throat, and I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry that it took him this long to see the truth, but another part of me just felt relieved that he was finally on my side. "It's okay, Dad," I said, even though it wasn't completely okay. We'll figure it out. He nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a small, genuine smile on his face. Yeah, we will. Later that night, I watched from my bedroom window as Samantha drove off, her car packed with bags. Part of me felt a little sorry for her, but mostly I felt relieved. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, it felt like things might actually get better. Dad and I sat down that night and talked for hours. We went over everything, how things had been since Samantha moved in, all the stuff I'd been feeling but was too scared to say. It felt good to finally get it all out, and for the first time, he really listened. From now on, it's just you and me, he said. We're going to get through this together, and I'm not letting anything like this happen again. Hearing him say that made me feel safer than I had in a long time. As I went to bed that night, I knew things were still going to be tough, but for once I felt like we were actually going to be okay.